The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the ballroom, and I watched my mother's face go white as the DNA test results flashed across the massive screen behind the stage. Every single person at her precious charity gala, every investor, every socialite, every journalist, was staring at proof that the daughter she'd paraded around for 20 years wasn't biologically hers at all. But I was. I was the one she'd hidden in the basement, the one whose name she could never quite remember, the one she'd introduced as the help's daughter when guests accidentally stumbled upon me. And now everyone knew. I should probably back up. My name is, well, that's the thing, isn't it? In my first life, I died without ever hearing my mother say my name correctly. She called me you, girl, or when she was feeling particularly generous, the other one. My sister Miranda had a name that rolled off everyone's tongue like honey. Miranda Chen, the prodigy. Miranda Chen, the beloved daughter. Miranda Chen, who would inherit everything. I was just there. I died on my 23rd birthday. Not that anyone knew it was my birthday. I was bringing up boxes from the basement storage. Miranda was redecorating her room for the 5th time that year when I slipped on the stairs. The fall broke my neck. I remember lying there, paralyzed, staring up at the dusty basement ceiling, listening to the sounds of laughter from Miranda's party upstairs. It took them 3 hours to find me. By then, I was already gone. My mother's first words, when she saw my body, weren't grief or horror. They were, well, at least it didn't happen during the party. Can you imagine the scandal? But death, as it turned out, wasn't the end. I woke up in my childhood bed, the small cot in the basement storage room, with tears streaming down my face and the date glowing on my old alarm clock. I was 8 years old again. The year was 2008, and I had 15 years of memories that hadn't happened yet. 15 years of being forgotten, overlooked, and erased. 15 years of watching Miranda take credit for my accomplishments, my ideas, even my handwriting when she needed to forge report cards. 15 years of knowing exactly how it would all end, with me dead at the bottom of the stairs and them relieved they didn't have to pretend I existed anymore. I spent that first week of my second life crying into my thin pillow, terrified and confused. But then something hardened inside me, something that had never quite solidified in my first life. I realized I'd been given something precious: knowledge. I knew every cruel thing they would do, every time they would forget me, every moment they would choose Miranda over me, and I could prepare. The first thing I did was stop trying to make them remember my name. In my first life, I'd spent years correcting them, reminding them, writing my name on everything I owned. "It's Elena," I'd say softly. "My name is Elena." They'd nod, apologize absently, and then call me you again 5 minutes later. This time, I didn't bother. When my mother called me girl, I answered. When my father gestured vaguely in my direction and said, "the other daughter," I smiled. When Miranda introduced me to her friends as, I don't know, some kid, I just waved. I stopped fighting to be seen because I realized something crucial. Being invisible was my greatest weapon. Let me paint you a picture of the Chen family. My father, Richard Chen, had built a tech empire from nothing. Chen Industries was worth billions, with fingers in everything from software to real estate. My mother, Victoria, came from old money, the kind of family that had streets named after them. Their marriage was a merger as much as a romance, combining new wealth with old prestige. Miranda was born a year after their wedding, and from what I'd pieced together over 2 lifetimes, I was born 2 years after that. But here's the thing I discovered in my research during my first life, hidden in old hospital records I'd found while cleaning out the attic. I wasn't adopted. The DNA didn't lie. Victoria Chen was my biological mother, and Richard Chen was my biological father. So why did they treat me like I didn't exist? I never found out in my first life. But in this one, I was determined to uncover the truth while simultaneously preparing for my future. And I started by becoming a ghost in my own home. I was 8 years old, small for my age, with dark hair and darker eyes that people's gazes seemed to slide right past. Miranda was 10, already beautiful, already charismatic, already the center of every room she entered. She had our mother's blonde hair and blue eyes, colored contacts and dye I now knew, though no one else did. Victoria had been desperately trying to look more Western when she was younger, trying to fit in with her old money peers. Miranda had simply inherited the pretense. I looked like my father's mother, I discovered. My grandmother had died before I was born, and there were no photos of her in the house. But I'd found one picture, tucked away in a forgotten album in the basement. She'd had the same dark hair, the same sharp features, the same eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I wondered if that was why they couldn't stand to look at me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the years between 8 and 23 the second time around. I became a student of my own erasure. Every time they forgot my name, I made a note. Every time Miranda took credit for something I'd done, I documented it. Every time I was excluded from family photos, family dinners, family trips, I recorded the date and circumstance, but I didn't confront them. I didn't cry or complain. I just collected evidence. I also became very, very good at being invisible in useful ways. I learned to move through the house like a shadow, present but unnoticed. This meant I was there for every private conversation, every whispered phone call, every secret meeting in my father's study. I heard everything. I learned that Chen Industries wasn't as stable as everyone thought. My father had made some risky investments in my first life that had paid off through sheer luck, but they'd nearly bankrupted him first. This time, I knew which investments to quietly sabotage and which to leave alone. A misplaced file here, a accidentally overheard conversation there. I was 8 years old, then 10, then 12, but I had the mind of a woman who'd spent her first life invisible. No one suspected the girl they couldn't remember was pulling strings. I learned that my mother's charity work was mostly a front for money laundering. She'd been funneling Chen Industries funds through fake charities for years, building her own secret empire. In my first life, this had never been discovered. This time, I started keeping records. Bank statements that went missing, but actually ended up in a safety deposit box I'd opened under a false name. Easy when you're a ghost, no one checks ID for a child who doesn't officially exist in most records. I learned that Miranda wasn't the prodigy everyone thought she was. Every award, every achievement, every glowing report card, half of them were mine, stolen and claimed as hers. The other half were bought, bribed, or fabricated. My parents had been paying teachers, judges, and administrators since she was 6 years old, and I learned the truth about why I'd been erased. I was 14 when I finally heard the full story, eavesdropping from behind my father's study bookshelf. There was a gap I could slip through, too small for anyone to notice a thin teenager who barely ate because she was only fed leftovers. My grandmother, my father's mother, had been the original founder of what became Chen Industries. She'd started with a small software company in the 1970s, revolutionary for a Chinese immigrant woman. The company was supposed to go to my father, but with conditions. It could only be inherited by a grandchild who looked like her, who carried her bloodline visibly. It was an old country superstition, a belief that the family luck was tied to physical resemblance. My grandmother had been adamant, had put it in her will with ironclad legal language. Miranda, with her blonde hair and blue eyes, didn't qualify. I did. When I was born, looking exactly like my grandmother's portrait, my mother had panicked. The will specified that the inheriting grandchild would take control of the company at age 25. If my parents acknowledged me, treated me as their daughter, educated me properly, I would eventually take everything. Miranda would get nothing. So they made a choice. They would hide me in plain sight. They would make sure I was uneducated, undocumented in most official capacities, unknown to the world. When I turned 25, they would declare I'd been troubled, perhaps, institutionalize me, definitely make sure I was in no position to claim anything. And if I happened to die before then, well, that would solve everything, wouldn't it? In my first life, I died at 23, just 2 years too early for them. I wondered if the fall had really been an accident, or if Miranda's redecoration had been strategically timed. This time, I would live. And I would take everything they'd tried to steal from me. But I'm getting ahead of the story again. Let me tell you about the years of preparation, because revenge isn't a moment, it's a symphony. And every note has to be perfectly placed. At 14, I started my real education. The one thing my parents couldn't completely control was the internet. The basement had an old computer, forgotten and unused, and I taught myself everything. I used my mother's credit card, she never checked the statements for small amounts, to buy online courses. I learned coding from my grandmother's old company records, which I'd found hidden in the basement. I learned business, finance, law. I studied my father's company inside and out until I knew it better than he did. I also started building my own identity outside the house. Online, I was Ellie Grant, a teenage entrepreneur. I created apps, sold them, invested the money. By the time I was 16, I had $500,000 in accounts my family didn't know existed. By 18, I had 5 million. I did it all from the basement, on a computer no one remembered was there, using a name no one in the house could recall. The invisibility that was meant to destroy me became my greatest asset. Meanwhile, I watched Miranda stumble through life on my parents' money and her stolen achievements. She went to an elite high school where my parents had donated a building. She dated the sons of senators and CEOs. She was groomed to be the perfect heiress, but she was also stupid and cruel, and those traits only intensified as she grew older. At 16, Miranda won a national coding competition. I'd entered the same competition under a pseudonym and placed first. Miranda had placed 23rd, but my father had paid the judges to award her my prize and my recognition. I watched from the audience, not as family, of course, but as household staff. As she accepted the trophy, the scholarship, the accolades, I smiled and took notes. At 18, Miranda got into Harvard. She hadn't written her own entrance essay. I'd found her paying a service to do it. She hadn't earned her SAT scores. I'd watched my mother bribe the test administrators. She hadn't done any of the volunteer work on her application. Most of it was fabricated, and some of it was actually my volunteer work, claimed as hers. I documented everything. At 20, Miranda landed an internship at Chen Industries, supposedly because of her impressive qualifications. She lasted 3 weeks before my father quietly moved her to a do-nothing position where she couldn't cause damage. The other employees hated her. She was incompetent, entitled, and vicious to anyone she considered beneath her. I worked in that same building in the IT department under the name Elena Grant. My father walked past me dozens of times and never recognized his own daughter. Why would he? He'd spent 20 years training himself not to see me. But I saw everything. I had access to every system, every file, every secret. I was the invisible girl in the server room, fixing problems and building back doors. I was 23 years old again, second life, and I was ready. The catalyst, ironically, was the same as my first life. Miranda wanted to redecorate her room. She was 25 now, still living at home despite her Harvard degree, bought, not earned, and her supposed job at Chen Industries, which she rarely attended. She wanted me to bring up boxes from the basement. You, Hanna, she called down the stairs. She never came down to the basement herself. Bring up the boxes marked winter clothes. I'm donating them. I smiled in the darkness. Of course. But this time I didn't slip. This time I carried the boxes up carefully and set them in her room. This time I watched as she rifled through them carelessly, tossing aside expensive coats and dresses like trash. God, these are so outdated, she muttered. I don't know why Mother kept them. I did. They were from my grandmother's estate, packed away after she died. My mother had never wanted to deal with them, so they'd been moldering in the basement for decades. Miranda held up a beautiful jade necklace, genuine and antique. This is actually pretty. I'll keep this. That belonged to your grandmother, I said quietly. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw confusion in her eyes. She knew she should know who I was. The information was there, buried under years of conditioning, but she couldn't quite grasp it. Whatever, she said finally. It's mine now, just like everything else. I left her room and went back to the basement. I sat at my computer and sent a single email from an anonymous account to a journalist I'd been cultivating for 3 years. Attached were documents, bank records, bribery receipts, false transcripts, DNA tests. I'd run myself years ago, everything. The subject line read, "The Chen family's greatest secret." Then I made a phone call to my father's lawyer, the one who'd handled my grandmother's estate. I'd been in contact with him for 5 years, slowly feeding him information, slowly building a case. He was a good man who'd been horrified to learn how the will had been perverted. It's time. I said. File the claim. Are you sure? He asked. This will destroy your family. They destroyed me first, I said. I'm just setting the record straight. The final piece was the hardest. I'd been putting it off because it meant revealing myself, truly revealing myself in a way I couldn't take back. But it was necessary. I created a video. In it, I spoke directly to the camera, my face calm, my voice steady. I told the story of my two lives. I showed the evidence of my erasure, or rather the documentation of it. Photos where I'd been cropped out, family trees that didn't include my name, school records that had been altered to remove my existence. I showed the basement room where I'd lived for 15 years, twice over. The small cot, the single bare bulb, the tiny computer in the corner. I showed my achievements, the apps I'd created, the companies I'd built, the code that was running on millions of devices worldwide. All done from this basement, by the invisible girl. And then I showed what I'd discovered. Proof that I was the rightful heir to Chen Industries. DNA evidence. The will. Legal documents that had been hidden and falsified. I uploaded the video to every platform I could find. I posted it at 3 a.m., timed to go viral during morning commute hours, and then I walked upstairs for the first time in years without being summoned. My mother was having coffee in the sunroom. She glanced up when I entered, her expression vaguely annoyed. "What do you want?" she asked. Not, "Who are you?" Not yet, but close. "I wanted to let you know," I said calmly, Sam, "that by noon today, everyone will know what you did." She blinked. "What are you talking about? And who?" She stopped, frowned, squinted at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "My name is Elena," I said. "Elena Chen. I'm your daughter, the one you tried to erase. And I'm about to take everything from you." The coffee cup slipped from her fingers. I watched it fall in slow motion, watched the liquid splash across her expensive white carpet, watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally, horror. "You," she whispered. "You're supposed to be dead?" I smiled. "I was. You got your wish the first time around, but this time I'm very much alive, and I've been preparing for this moment for 15 years. Her phone started ringing, then her tablet, then the house phone. Within minutes, my father burst into the room, his face red with fury and panic. "What the hell is happening?" he roared. "My board is calling, the press is calling. There's a video—" He stopped when he saw me standing there, saw my mother's stricken face. "Hello, Father," I said. "We should talk about Grandmother's will." Miranda came running down the stairs, her phone in her hand, her face a mask of rage. "Someone is spreading lies about me online. They're saying I cheated, that I'm not really—" She saw me, stopped. This is you. You're that girl from the basement." "I'm your sister," I said. "But you never bothered to remember that?" The next few hours were chaos. Lawyers arrived, reporters camped outside. My video had gone viral, 10 million views and climbing. The hashtag #InvisibleHeir was trending worldwide. But the real turning point came at noon, when my father's lawyer held a press conference. On the front lawn, he read from my grandmother's will, explained the inheritance conditions, and presented DNA evidence proving I was Richard and Victoria Chen's biological daughter. He also presented evidence of my parents' fraud, the falsified records, the hidden accounts, the systematic erasure of my existence, and evidence of Miranda's fake achievements, complete with receipts of bribes and payments. The Chen family empire started crumbling in real time. By evening, my father had been removed from the board of Chen Industries. My mother was under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Miranda's Harvard degree was under review, and every award she'd ever won was being investigated. And I was named interim CEO of Chen Industries, effective immediately. That night, I moved into my grandmother's old penthouse, the one that had been locked up since her death. My parents hadn't been able to sell it. It was part of the estate tied to the will. I opened the door with the key the lawyer had given me and stepped into a time capsule. She'd left everything ready for me. Documents, evidence, a key. even a letter addressed to my granddaughter who carries my face. She'd known. She'd known what would happen, had tried to prevent it with the will, but she'd also prepared for the possibility that my parents would try to cheat it. "They will try to hide you," she'd written in English that was slightly broken but perfectly clear. "They will try to make you small, but you are not small. You are my blood, my legacy, my revenge. Take what is yours. Make them remember." I cried reading that letter. After 2 lifetimes of being forgotten, someone had remembered to leave me a legacy. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I gave interviews carefully and selectively. I let people see the basement room, photograph the evidence. I showed the world what it meant to be erased by the people who were supposed to love you. The public response was overwhelming. Support poured in from people who'd felt invisible, forgotten, or erased in their own lives. I Am Elena became a movement for survivors of family abuse and neglect. But the sweetest moments were the private ones. Like when I had my parents' house seized as part of the estate. It had been purchased with Chen Industries funds and thus belonged to the company, which belonged to me. I watched from my grandmother's penthouse as they were forced to move out, taking only what they could prove they'd bought with their own money. Most of Miranda's designer wardrobe stayed behind. She'd never had her own money. Like when I restructured Chen Industries, firing every executive who'd been complicit in my father's schemes. I installed leaders who'd earned their positions, many of them women and immigrants like my grandmother. Within 3 months, the company's value had increased by 40%, like when Harvard officially revoked Miranda's degree after discovering the extent of her fraud. She tried to claim she'd been victimized by our parents, that she hadn't known. But I released the recordings I'd made, conversations where she'd explicitly discussed the cheating, the bribes, the stolen achievements. She'd known, she'd reveled in it like when my mother's trial concluded. She was sentenced to 15 years for embezzlement and fraud. In the courtroom, she finally looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment she truly recognized her daughter. "Elena," she whispered as they led her away. "Your name is Elena." "Yes," I said, it always was." My father got 20 years. He'd been the architect of it all, the one who'd decided to erase me to protect Miranda's inheritance. In his sentencing statement, he tried to apologize, said he'd been blinded by ambition and tradition. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was too busy running his company better than he ever had. Miranda was the most pathetic of all. Without her parents' money and protection, she fell apart completely. She tried to leverage her social connections, but everyone had seen the evidence. She was unemployable, unmarriageable in the circles she'd once ruled. Last I heard, she was working retail under a fake name, terrified someone would recognize her. I could have forgiven them. I could have been merciful. That's what the therapist I'd started seeing suggested, that holding on to anger would only hurt me. But here's the thing. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. For the first time in 2 lives, I existed. I had a name that people knew, a face that people recognized, an identity that couldn't be erased. I walked into rooms and people saw me. They knew who I was. More than that, I'd built something real. Chen Industries under my leadership became exactly what my grandmother had envisioned. A company that uplifted immigrants and women, that created opportunities for people who'd been overlooked and underestimated. I established a foundation for children from abusive families, helping them document their lives and protect themselves legally. I made sure no other child would be erased the way I had been. 5 years after the day I walked up from the basement for the last time, I held a gala. Not for charity, not like my mother's fake fundraisers, but to celebrate Chen Industries' 50th anniversary and my grandmother's legacy. I wore the jade necklace Miranda had tried to claim. I stood on the same stage where I'd once revealed my mother's crimes, but this time the screen behind me showed my grandmother's face, then mine beside it. "My name is Elena Chen," I said to a room full of people who knew exactly who I was, and this is my family's story. I told it all, the erasure, the rebirth, the revenge that had been really just taking back what was always mine. I told them about the invisible girl in the basement who'd become a CEO, about the forgotten daughter who'd inherited an empire. The room erupted in applause, but I wasn't done. "There's one more thing," I said. "I've been thinking a lot about names lately, about how important they are, about how they define us, connect us to our past and future. I gestured, and the screen changed to show the new Chen Industries logo. It incorporated my grandmother's Chinese name in elegant calligraphy. Chen Industries was built by a woman whose name many people forgot, I said, a Chinese immigrant who faced discrimination and erasure but persevered anyway. I was almost erased too. But I'm here, and I'm making sure that neither of us is ever forgotten again. More applause, but the real moment came during the reception. I was standing by the bar when someone approached me, a young woman, maybe 19, with nervous eyes and a familiar hunched posture of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. "Ms. Chen," she said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. I saw your story and it helped me. My family doesn't remember my name either. They call me the extra one. But after seeing what you did, I started documenting everything. I opened my own bank account. I'm building my own life where I exist." I looked at her, really looked at her, in a way no one had looked at me for so many years. "What's your name?" I asked. "Jessica," she said, and her voice grew stronger saying it. "Jessica Liu." "It's wonderful to meet you, Jessica Liu," I said. "You're not extra. You're not invisible. You exist and you matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that." She started crying. I hugged her, this stranger who was also me, in another life, and I realized that this moment of being seen and seeing others was the real victory. The revenge had been satisfying. Watching my family lose everything they'd tried to steal from me had been cathartic. But this, helping others claim their own existence, this was the point. I gave Jessica my card. "Call me, I said. Chen Industries has an internship program for students from difficult family situations. Full scholarship, full salary. If you're interested." She clutched the card like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for existing." "Thank you for existing too," I said. "Don't let anyone make you stop." That's the real ending, I think. Not the courtrooms or the corporate takeovers or the public downfall of my family. Those were just plot points. The real ending is understanding that existing, truly, fully existing, is its own form of victory. My parents tried to erase me because they thought my existence threatened theirs. But existence isn't a zero-sum game. Me living, thriving, succeeding didn't require them to fail. Their failure came from their own choices, their own cruelty, their own crimes. I just stopped letting them forget I was real. 10 years after my rebirth, I stand in the office that was once my father's, looking out over the city. Chen Industries is thriving. The foundation I created has helped thousands of families. My grandmother's legacy is secure, and growing. I have friends now, people who know my name and say it often, just because they can. I have a therapist who's helping me process 2 lifetimes of trauma. I have a life that's mine, not stolen or borrowed or hidden. Sometimes, late at night, I think about my first death, about lying at the bottom of those basement stairs, hearing my family laugh at Miranda's party, knowing I would die alone and forgotten. But then I think about this life, about Jessica and the thousands of others like her who've reached out to say, "I exist too." About the empire I built from a basement computer, about the name that everyone knows now, Elena Chen. My parents spent 23 years trying to make me disappear. They failed. And in their failure, I became more real, more present, more unforgettable than they ever were. The basement room where I lived is now a memorial of sorts. I've kept it exactly as it was. The cot, the bare bulb, the old computer. It's part of the Chen Industries headquarters tour, a reminder of where the company's current leader came from, a reminder that invisible people are still people, that forgotten names still have power. Visitors often cry when they see it. They understand what it means to be erased, to be the one whose name no one remembers. But then they see my office, see the empire I built, see my name on the building, and they remember that erasure isn't permanent, that invisibility can be overcome, that the forgotten can rise. Last month, my mother was released from prison. She's 62 now, broken and aged beyond her years. She tried to contact me through her lawyer asking for a meeting. I declined. Not out of anger, I'm long past that, but because I've realized something important. I don't need her to acknowledge me anymore. I don't need her to remember my name or apologize for forgetting it. I don't need anything from her at all. I exist completely independent of her recognition. That's true freedom. Not revenge, not vindication, but the simple fact that I am, whether she acknowledges it or not. My father still has 8 years left on his sentence. He writes me letters sometimes. They're not apologies exactly, more like explanations. He tries to justify what he did, claiming he was honoring tradition, protecting the family, making hard choices. I don't read them anymore. I have them filed away, documented like everything else, but I don't need to absorb his excuses. His reasons don't matter. What matters is what I built in spite of him. Miranda tried to write a tell-all book, The Real Story of the Chen Dynasty, or something equally dramatic. She painted herself as a victim, claimed she'd been manipulated by our parents, that she'd actually tried to include me, but I'd been too withdrawn and angry. It was fiction, obviously. No publisher would touch it after I released more recordings proving her full complicity and enthusiasm for my erasure. She ended up self-publishing it on some obscure platform. I heard it sold fewer than 50 copies. I didn't sue her for libel. I didn't need to. The truth was already out there, already documented, already known. Her lies couldn't compete with reality. These days, I barely think about them. They're footnotes in my story, cautionary tales I sometimes share in interviews. But they're not the main narrative anymore. The main narrative is what I'm building. The thousands of employees who have opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. The scholarship recipients who are becoming the next generation of leaders. The families who've been reunited or protected because of the foundation's work. The main narrative is every person who's reached out to say, "You made me feel seen." That's what I want to be remembered for. Not the revenge, though it was satisfying, but the visibility, the proof that existing matters, that names have power, that being forgotten isn't the same as not being real. I think about my grandmother sometimes, the woman I never met but who left me everything. She existed in a time when women like her, immigrant women, Chinese women, ambitious women, were supposed to be invisible. But she built an empire anyway. She made herself matter. And then she made sure I would matter too, even from beyond the grave. She remembered me before I was born, carved out a place for me in her will, left me the tools I would need. "Make them remember," she wrote. And I did. But more than that, I made sure that I remembered myself. That was the key, really. In my first life, I'd let their forgetting define me. I'd internalized the invisibility, believed I was less real because they couldn't see me. In this life, I knew I was real whether they acknowledged it or not. Their blindness was their problem, not mine. That's what I tell the Jessicas of the world when they reach out. You exist. You're real. Your name matters. Don't wait for anyone to validate that. Validate it yourself. It's late now. I'm in my office, the city glittering below me, and I'm preparing for tomorrow's board meeting. We're launching a new initiative, a partnership with schools to help identify and support children from abusive homes. We're training teachers to notice the invisible kids, the ones whose names get forgotten, who sit in the back of the class and never raise their hands. We're making sure they're seen. My assistant knocks on the door. "Ms. Chen, there's someone here to see you." She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Her name is, let me guess, I say, smiling. She says no one remembers her name. My assistant looks surprised. "How did you know?" "Send her in," I say, "and make sure we get her name exactly right in all our records." Because that's what this was all for in the end. Not revenge, though that was satisfying. Not wealth, though that's useful. Not even justice, though that mattered. It was for this, the ability to look another invisible person in the eye and say, "I see you. I remember your name. You exist." The ability to be so unforgettably real that others believe they can be real too. My name is Elena Chen. I was erased, I died, I was reborn, and I took back everything that was stolen from me. But more importantly, I exist. Fully, completely, undeniably. And no one will ever forget my name again. Not because I need them to remember, but because I'll never forget it myself. That's the real victory. That's the real revenge. That's the real story. I didn't stop them from forgetting my name. I just stopped letting their forgetting matter. And I started remembering theirs, not as family, not as parents or sister, but as the people who taught me the most important lesson. That existence is a choice. and I choose to exist. The door opens. A young woman walks in, thin and scared and trying to disappear into herself. Hello, I say warmly. What's your name? Sarah, she whispers. Sarah Park. But I don't know if you'll remember. Sarah Park, I repeat, committing it to memory. It's wonderful to meet you, Sarah Park. Please sit down, tell me your story, and I promise I'll remember every word. Because that's what it means to be truly victorious, not destroying your enemies, though they destroyed themselves well enough, but being the person you needed when you were invisible, being the voice that says, you're real, you matter, you exist. After Rebirth, I didn't stop them from forgetting my name. I just made sure the whole world remembered it instead. And now I use that memory, that visibility, that undeniable existence to help others claim their own names, their own stories, their own lives. That's not just revenge, that's legacy. That's justice. That's freedom. And most importantly, that's real. Just like I am, just like I always was, even when no one could see me. Elena Chen, CEO, founder, heir, existing undeniably and completely, forever.